Hey, Tere, and welcome to Shadows of Thales. I'm glad you found your way here tonight. This little corner where darkness softens, and stories breathe quietly in the background. Before we drift into tonight's tale, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if what you hear truly feels right for you. Your comfort matters more than anything else. If you'd like, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time the night found you. I love seeing how our growing community gathers from so many different places. It's a reminder that even in silence, we're connected. I hope you'll allow this video to accompany you for a while. Every story here is shaped to ease your thoughts, soothe your mind, and guide you gently into the late hours with a touch of mystery and calm. So go ahead, lower the lights, make yourself comfortable, take a slow breath, let the noise of the day melt away. And now, let's step into tonight's story together. The storm did not appear on the horizon. There were no dark clouds, no rising winds, no warning from the sky. The sea was calm, almost gently, when we changed course. No one could later explain why we did. There was no order recorded, no discussion remembered. One moment we were sailing straight, the next we were turning slowly into nothing at all. The first sign was the sound, a distant, low rumble, like thunder heard through deep water. It didn't come from above. It came from around us, pressing in softly, patiently. The sky remained clear. Stars were visible. The moon reflected cleanly on the surface of the sea. Yet the rumble continued. I checked the radar. Empty. The weather instruments. Normal. The radio. Clear. "Do you hear that?" someone asked on the deck. Not everyone did. That was when the strangeness truly began. The rain started, but only just above the deck. Nowhere else. Thin drops fell in a narrow, perfect circle surrounding the ship, darkening the wood, vanishing the moment they touched the sea. If you stepped a few meters away from the railings, you'd find nothing, just dry air and calm water. We were inside something only we could feel. Then the wind followed. It was an impossible wind, pushing against our sails from every direction at once. It wasn't a violent force. It was more like a persistent tugging, guiding us rather than resisting. The old ship creaked not in strain but in adjustment, as if it were learning a new, unnatural rhythm. It was a sound I'd never heard before. A sound of wood and rope surrendering to a will that wasn't ours. Lightning flashed. Not in the sky. It ignited inside the fog that wasn't there. For a split second, the world was illuminated by this silent, internal flash. And in that brief moment, I saw it walls of rain rising vertically from the sea, forming a corridor around us. It was a tunnel made of water. Beyond those walls, the sea was untouched. Silent. Normal. We were sailing inside a storm that had no outside. The crew members reacted in their own ways. Some clamped their hands over their ears, trying to block out the low, pervasive rumble. Others laughed nervously, a sound that was quickly swallowed by the odd quiet. A few just stared ahead with empty expressions, their eyes wide, as if they recognized this impossible place from a forgotten nightmare. I remember the face of the old bosun, his knuckles white on the railing, his lips moving without a sound. He saw something we didn't. Then the waves began, but they did not rise and fall like any wave I'd ever seen. They tilted. The sea beneath us shifted angles subtly, as though gravity itself was being bent inward, focused entirely on our vessel. Walking became a strange, difficult dance. The horizon would lean to the left, then correct itself, then lean sharply to the right. It felt like standing on a spinning top. I stumbled back to the navigation room, my heart pounding against my ribs. The ship's logbook lay open on the table, and there, in fresh ink that hadn't been there a minute ago, was the first impossible entry, written in a hand that was not mine, not anyone's. It read, "Storm confirmed. Visibility perfect." Thunder rolled again, closer now, circling the ship slowly. The sound followed us, a predator pacing its cage. It never overtook us, never fell behind. It was always just there, a constant reminder of our isolation. That was the moment a terrifying realization dawned on me. This storm wasn't something we had accidentally sailed into. It was something that had noticed us. It had chosen us, and it was adjusting its shape. To fit our ship, the air grew heavy, thick with the smell of ozone and wet stone. The water around the hull started to glow with a faint, greenish light, pulsing in time with a deep rumble. It wasn't bioluminescence. It was something else, something ancient and wrong. The light seemed to be coming from the depths, as if a giant eye had opened beneath us. I grabbed the ship's internal comms. All hands. My voice was shaky, unfamiliar to my own ears. Report your status. Has anyone seen anything unusual? The replies were a chaotic jumble. One man swore the stars were rearranging themselves into new constellations. Another claimed he could see figures moving within the walls of rain, tall, slender shapes that watched us pass. The cook, a man of unshakable nerve, simply said his pots and pans were floating an inch above the shelves. Panic was a cold fire spreading through the crew. We were trapped, not just in a storm, but in a place that defied all laws of nature. The ship was no longer ours to command. It moved with a purpose that was alien to us, guided by the unseen wind and the tilting sea. We were merely passengers on a journey to a destination we couldn't comprehend. I went back out onto the deck. The circular rain was heavier now, a curtain of water isolating us completely. The green glow from the sea was brighter, casting eerie shadows that danced and writhed on the wet planks. Looking up, I saw that the perfect circle of clear sky above us was shrinking. The storm was closing in. The patch of familiar stars was a dwindling window to a world we had left behind. The distant rumble was no longer distant. It was inside my head, a vibration in my very bones. It felt like a voice, ancient and vast, trying to speak in a language of thunder and pressure. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the intent. It was curiosity. The storm was examining us, piece by piece, soul by soul. It was learning. The ship gave another deep groan, a sound of final surrender. The mast tilted to an impossible angle, yet nothing broke. The sails, full of wind from every direction, held firm. We were being remade, just as the storm had remade itself for us. I looked at the faces of the crew, still on deck. The fear was still there, but it was being replaced by a strange, hollow acceptance. We were part of it now. The ship, the storm, and us. We were one impossible event, sailing through a sea that was no longer water, under a sky that was no longer air. The last patch of stars disappeared. We were sealed, and the light from below was the only illumination, bathing everything in its sickly green radiance. The rumble settled into a steady, rhythmic pulse, like a colossal heartbeat. The ship that sailed into a storm no one else could see was no longer just a ship. It was a message in a bottle cast into an ocean that didn't exist on any map. And we, the crew, were the words written inside. Our journey had just begun. The storm learned our names, at least. That was how it felt when the whispering began. It wasn't a voice in the traditional sense, not something you could hear with your ears. It was more like a pressure, a sudden weight inside your skull, shaping thoughts that did not belong to you. Each crew member reacted at a different moment. A slight hesitation in their work, a pause mid-step on the wet deck. Fingers would tighten around ropes for no reason. Eyes would unfocus, gazing into the deluge, as if listening to something spoken just beneath the threshold of hearing. You'd see it happen to someone. Then, moments later, feel it yourself. The thought would arrive uninvited. It knows you're here. The rain thickened, but only on the deck. It was a bizarre, localized phenomenon. I remember leaning out over the railing, bracing myself against the wind, and seeing perfectly calm water below. The sea was a mirror, untouched by the tempest, raging just a few feet above it, reflecting the stars with perfect, serene clarity. Above us, the sky was equally clear, a vast, dark canvas pricked with distant light. We were completely sealed inside our own private weather system, a moving pocket of storm that refused to exist beyond the very edges of our ship. It was as if a bubble had formed around us, and inside that bubble, the world had gone mad. The thunder had changed its behavior to, before, It felt like it was circling us, a predator sizing up its prey from a distance. Now, it was different. It followed every time a crew member moved too far toward the bow, trying to get a better look at what lay ahead. The low rumble would shift, positioning itself directly in front of them. When another sailor, unnerved, retreated toward the stern, the sound would roll back right behind them. One of the crew, a seasoned sailor named Harlan, dropped his lantern. We all flinched, expecting the familiar sound of shattering glass and the spill of oil, but there was no crash. The lantern hit the deck with a dull thud, and the glass didn't even crack. Instead, the flame inside simply went dark, extinguished in an instant, as if the light itself had been absorbed, swallowed by the oppressive atmosphere. Just moments later, we saw something that made our blood run cold. Faint flickers of light began to appear within the rain itself. Tiny, momentary sparks, like fireflies, traveling downward with the droplets, carrying the stolen light of Harlan's lantern. The storm wasn't just a force of nature. It was taking what we gave it, feeding on our presence. The ship's logbook changed again. I had been keeping it, and I swear on my life, no one had touched it. I had it locked in my cabin, but when I checked it, new lines had formed on the page, the ink bleeding slowly across the paper as if it were still wet. The script was an unnerving mimicry of my own handwriting. 2 entries stood out: crew integrity decreasing, and beneath it, storm stability improving. The two were connected. Our fear, our confusion, our dwindling hope was somehow strengthening the storm. It was a parasitic relationship, and we were the unwilling hosts. That was when the wind spoke. Not in words, not in whispers, but in a distinct, undeniable rhythm. A powerful pulse passed through the sails, making them billow and snap in unison. The vibration traveled down the rigging, humming through the ropes, and then into the deck beneath our boots, a deep, resonant thrum that we felt in our bones. The entire ship answered with a groan, but it wasn't a groan of strain or fear. It was a groan of recognition, of submission. The vessel adjusted its course, slightly, all on its own. The wheel didn't turn, but the bow shifted a few degrees to port. We were no longer navigating. We were being carried. Things grew stranger still. Faces began to look unfamiliar, not physically changed, but distant. You'd look at a man you'd sailed with 4 years, and it was like seeing him through a thick pane of glass. He was there, but he was also a little farther away than he should be. Conversations fell apart. Someone would start a thought, trail off, and forget what they were saying entirely. Names, even our own, felt harder to remember. I tried to recall why we were even sailing this route, what our original destination was. The reason was there a moment before, and then it just slipped away, smooth and effortless, like trying to hold water in your fingers. The storm wasn't just outside us, it was inside our minds, erasing us piece by piece. Lightning flashed again, a brilliant, silent web across our confined sky. But this time it revealed something inside the storm. It wasn't clouds, not in the way we know them. It was depth. We saw layered darkness folding inward, spiraling slowly and deliberately, like the inside of a vast, turning, cosmic eye. The rain itself seemed to bend toward this central vortex, curving its path as it fell. The thunder deepened, taking on a tone of satisfaction, a low rumble of contentment. The storm was no longer just reacting to us, it was containing us. Its purpose was becoming clear. It had drawn us in, and now it was closing the trap. One by one, the crew came to the same horrifying realization. Our instruments weren't broken. When we'd first entered the storm, we assumed our compasses had failed, our barometers were shot. But now we understood the world outside the storm, the one with calm seas and clear skies, still existed. It was right there, just beyond the rain. We were simply no longer part of it. We were in a separate space, a fold in reality that moved with the ship. We were ghosts in our own world, able to see it, but no longer touch it. As dawn approached, something we sensed in our bones rather than saw. With our ice, the storm tightened its grip. The wind that had howled and pulsed now grew still. The torrential rain slowed to a light, almost gentle drizzle. The thunder, once a constant, threatening presence, quieted, leaving an expectant, heavy silence in its wake. The feeling was unanimous. The storm had learned everything it needed from us. It had measured our fear, catalogued our thoughts, and absorbed our light. Its study was complete. When morning finally came, the transition was seamless. One moment we were in the quiet heart of the strange, dark tempest. The next, the sun was on our faces. The ship sailed out into clear skies and calm water. The deck was dry. The air was warm. It was as if nothing had ever happened. Looking back, we saw nothing. No wall of rain, no dark clouds, just open, endless ocean. Other ships would see us pass on the horizon, a vessel sailing calmly, untouched by any weather. Their logs would note us as a passing ship on a peaceful day. They would never know what we had left behind inside that unseen storm. They would never know what parts of our minds, our memories, our very selves, were still trapped in there, or what the storm, now fed and satisfied, had taken with it as it moved on, searching for its next vessel, its next lesson. Hello, and welcome to the channel. Today, we're diving into a story that will send a chill down your spine and make you look twice at your own shadow. It's called The Ship That Returned with Fewer Shadows. Settle in, turn down the lights, and let's begin. The first thing we noticed when the ship returned was the light. The sun shone normally over the harbor, bright and steady. Yet something felt wrong the moment we stepped onto the dock. The ship cast a long, dark shadow across the water butt. Not all of us did. At first, no one said anything. It's not something you bring up. You don't question the sun. You certainly don't question your own shadow. You just assume your eyes are tired, that the angle is strange, that the midday sun is playing tricks on you. But the feeling, that unsettling itch at the back of your mind, it lingered. As the crew disembarked, the harbor master greeted us. He was a familiar, Hobby El Figuri, smiling as he ticked names off his weathered clipboard. E paused once. His brow furrowing. He looked up. His eyes scanning our faces, counted again, and then just shrugged and continued his work. The number was right. Everyone was present. Everyone, except their shadows. I was the one who confirmed it for myself. I bent down to tie a loose rope on the dock. A simple, mindless task I'd done 1,000 times. But this time was different. The dock beneath me was completely empty of my outline. There was no dark shape, no familiar silhouette mimicking my movement. Just clean, sun-bleached wood and piercing sunlight. I straightened up quickly, my heart beginning to pound a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I looked around, truly looked, for the first time. Others were starting to realize the same thing. A quiet confusion was spreading through the crew like a slow-moving fog. Some of us cast sharp, clear shadows that moved naturally with them, tethered to their heels as they should be. But others had none at all. The light just passed right through them, as if they were slightly out of sync with the world, like a ghost image on a faulty photograph. The strangest part, those without shadows felt no different. They laughed, they talked, they complained about the long voyage and the stale food, just like they always did. They didn't seem frightened. Yet, anyway, they just seemed distant, distracted, like people slowly waking from a very long and confusing dream. The ship, our vessel, our home for months, it still had its shadow. It was long and heavy, anchored firmly to the shimmering water, a stark black shape against the blue. It was the only thing that felt solid, real. That night, we all gathered in the mess hall. The air was thick with unspoken questions. The lanterns flickered, casting a warm, dancing glow, and shadows stretched and swayed along the walls, except for a few empty, glaring spaces where they should have been. Chairs scraped against the floor. Cups clinked, laughter echoed, but it was uneven, hollow. One of the crew, a young deckhand named Thomas, reached toward the light of a lantern, almost experimentally. He held his hand out, palm open, Nothing followed. No shadow stretched from his hand onto the table. He lowered it slowly, his face growing pale in the flickering light. "That wasn't like this when we left," he whispered, and his voice was so quiet it was almost lost in the room. But we all heard him. And with those words, a dam broke in our collective memory. A silence, heavy and absolute, settled over the mess hall. Everyone suddenly remembered the same things: the unnervingly stormless journey, the impossibly calm nights, the pervasive feeling of being watched without ever being seen. Fragments of a memory started to surface, pieced together from our shared experience. Standing on the deck late at night, the sound of water without any waves, the distinct, chilling sense of something standing right behind us, silent and still, as if it were measuring us, taking something from us. Outside, the moon rose, full and silver. It cast its own ethereal light across the harbor. Some of us, standing by the windows, cast long, pale shadows on the floor. Some of us did not. We were divided, marked, and then someone pointed. We all looked out at the water, at our ship, the ship's shadow, which had been so solid, so immovably dark beneath the sun. Now, under the moonlight, it twitched. Just once. A subtle, unnatural movement that had no reason to happen. It was a tremor, a shudder, as if the darkness itself was alive. And we knew, in that terrifying moment, that whatever had taken our shadows was still with us, hiding in the one place we couldn't escape. The darkness cast by our own ship. What happened on that voyage? What was it that stood behind the crew in the dead of night? And what happens when a shadow is no longer yours? That's where we leave Chapter 1. The mystery is just beginning. What do you think happened out on that calm, silent ocean? Let me know your theories in the comments below. The ones without shadows slept first. It wasn't because they were tired, or at least, not in the way you and I get tired. It was more like the night simply claimed them, drawing them in more quickly than the rest of us, as the lanterns on the ship were dimmed, one by one, and the moon climbed higher in the inky sky. Their eyes would lose focus. Their voices, once full of life and sailor songs, would soften to a whisper, and then they'd just drift into sleep, right where they sat. There were no dreams for them, no tossing or turning, just an unnerving stillness, a complete and total absence of movement. Those of us who still cast our shadows, well, we stayed awake. We had to. We watched the walls of the ship's cabins, our eyes glued to the dancing shapes. The shadows stretched and shrank with the flickering lantern light, but not always in time with their owners. Something was off. Some of the shadows lagged behind their person, as if reluctant. Others leaned in the wrong direction, defying the light source. And the ship's own shadow, the great, dark shape we could see through the portholes against the churning waves. It moved when nothing else did. Then, a soft sound began to rise from the deck. A dragging noise. Slow. Careful. Utterly deliberate. It was the kind of sound that makes the hairs on your arms stand up. A sound that doesn't belong on a ship in the middle of the ocean. We crept out of our quarters, our hearts pounding against our ribs. Moonlight spilled across the wooden deck, pale and cold, making everything look like it was carved from bone. The deck was empty at least of people, but it was crowded with shadows. They had gathered near the main mast, a writhing, overlapping mass of darkness. They twisted and merged where they touched, like ink bleeding into water. The ship's shadow towered above them all, thick and deep, a monstrous shape that reached down like a spectral anchor, pinning them to the deck. And then we saw him, one of the shadowless crew. He was just standing there, in the midst of them. He wasn't casting a shadow of his own, of course, but something else was. Something was standing directly behind him, shaped exactly like a man's shadow. As Sviwatch had frozen in place, this shape began to peel itself from the deck. The movement was all wrong. It was too smooth, too quiet, like a piece of black fabric being lifted by an unseen hand. It rose without any sense of depth, a flat thing pretending to be whole. A two-dimensional nightmare in a three-dimensional world. When this shadow thing stepped forward, the man it had been attached to simply collapsed. He fell to the deck in a heap, empty, He was still breathing, his chest rising and falling, but he was completely unresponsive. It was like a body left behind after something essential, something vital, had been surgically removed. We didn't scream, we couldn't. It felt as if the very air had been stolen from our lungs. We knew, somehow, that the shadows were listening. They began to move along the deck. These disembodied shapes, drifting toward their former owners, who slept so unnaturally still. Some slid back into place with a sickeningly natural motion, snapping into alignment at the feet of a sleeping sailor as if nothing had ever happened. But others hesitated, and then they chose differently. We watched as one shadow, which had belonged to a small, wiry deck, reached for the wrong persona, large, burly sailor sleeping nearby. At that exact moment, the ship's lanterns flickered violently, plunging us into near darkness before flaring up again. The ship itself groaned, a deep, resonant sound from its very timbers, almost like a sigh of satisfaction. The air grew colder, heavier, pressing down on us when the light finally stabilized. Two men stood under the cold moon where before there had been only one, plus a collapsed body. But only one shadow remained between them. It was a chilling, impossible arithmetic. By dawn, the whole strange ordeal was over. The shadowless crew, the ones who had collapsed, awoke slowly. They seemed confused, complaining of strange, formless dreams. They all said the same thing. They felt lighter, calmer, unburdened. But we noticed they started avoiding bright light, and they refused to look in mirrors. When our ship finally docked again weeks later, no one on the shore noticed anything was wrong. To them, we were just another crew, returning from a long voyage. The crew list was complete. The faces were all familiar. The voices sounded normal. The lie was perfect. Only at sunset did the horrifying truth reveal itself again. As we stood on the pier, watching our vessel, the ship cast its long, dark shadow across the water. It was a familiar sight. But then we looked behind us, at our own feet. Some of our shadows, they had stayed on the deck. They just stood there, dark figures on the empty ship, watching us leave. The ship always sank at exactly the same time. No alarms sounded. No waves rose in warning. At nightfall, when the horizon dissolved into darkness and the sea turned black and flat, the ship would simply begin to descend slowly, gently, as if the water had decided to open and make room for it. The first night, we thought it was a dream. The deck tilted just enough to notice. Lanterns swayed without wind. Cups slid across tables in smooth, careful lines. No panic, no rush. The sea climbed the sides of the hull quietly, without splashing. We watched the water rise. It didn't flood in. As the ship slipped beneath the surface, breathing became difficult not because of water, but pressure. A weight settled on the chest, steady and calm, urging stillness. The stars above vanished one by one, replaced by a dim blue darkness that pressed against the windows. The strange thing was this: we could still breathe. The air remained. The lanterns stayed lit. The deck remained dry. Outside the portholes, the sea moved slowly, thick and heavy, like a curtain being drawn closed. No one spoke. We descended for a long time, or maybe no time at all. Depths stopped meaning anything. There was no sense of motion anymore, only below. At some points, the ship touched something. Not with a jolt, but with a feeling, a soft, final contact. Like a thought coming to rest, the hull creaked gently, settling. Outside, the darkness deepened. That was when the sounds began. Muffled, distant, rhythmic, not water. Voices, they came from beneath the ship, rising through the floor, passing through metal and wood as if it weren't there. Slow conversations, laughter stretched thin, words spoken in languages we almost recognized. One of the crew pressed his ear to the deck. "They know us," he whispered. The lights dimmed, then stabilized. The ship felt comfortable, as if it had arrived somewhere familiar. We stayed there until morning, when the first hint of light appeared not from the sky, but from above the water. The ship began to rise. Slowly, reluctantly. The voices faded, disappointed. By sunrise, we were floating again. No damage. No leaks. No sign of descent. The logbook contained a new entry, written in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. Night completed. Return successful. We realized then the sinking was not an accident. It was part of the journey. Night after night, the ritual repeated. The sun would set, painting the sky in fiery strokes, before surrendering to the void. And like clockwork, our vessel would begin its silent plunge. We grew accustomed to the tilt, to the sight of the ocean rising to meet us like an old friend. The initial fear had long since dissolved, replaced by a strange, quiet acceptance. We stopped questioning it. We prepared for it. We'd gather in the main cabin as dusk fell, securing loose items not out of necessity, but out of habit. It became a routine, like sailors checking their knots or scanning the horizon. The pressure on our chests felt less like a weight and more like an embrace. It was the signal that the other world was approaching. We learned to live in two realities: the sunlit world of salt spray and open skies, and the deep, hushed world below. Each descent was identical, yet every night felt different. Sometimes the blue darkness outside the windows seemed brighter, more curious. Other times it felt ancient and heavy, filled with unseen things just beyond the light of our lanterns. We began to look forward to the voices. They became our nightly companions, our only connection to the abyss. We couldn't understand the words, but we started to recognize the tones. There was the low, rumbling voice that seemed to be telling long stories. There was a higher, lilting one that often followed with what sounded like laughter, sound like chimes in a deep well. We started to feel like we knew them. These speakers from the deep, we gave them names in our minds. The storyteller, the joker, the matriarch. One evening, a new sound joined the chorus. It was music, not an instrument we could name, but a series of long, mournful notes that resonated through the very soul of the ship. It was beautiful and deeply sad, a melody that spoke of immense loss and timeless waiting. It made the laughter of the joker seem hollow, and the stories of the storyteller feel like you. We sat in silence, captivated, letting the music wash over us. The air grew colder. The ship felt less like a vessel and more like a tune, a listening post at the bottom of the world. We didn't speak a word until the music faded with the coming dawn. That night changed something for us. The descent was no longer a passive journey. It was a pilgrimage. We started leaving things on the deck before the ship went under. A polished shell, a carved piece of wood, a brightly colored flower we'd kept pressed in a book. It was a foolish, sentimental Hester, an offering to the unseen. We didn't know if they were received, or even noticed. But when the ship resurfaced, the items were always gone. We took it as a sign, a silent exchange. Our curiosity grew bolder. Whoa, verite? What did they want? Were they ghosts? Survivors of some ancient, sunken civilization? We had 1,000 theories, each more fantastical than the last. The ship's logbook continued to fill with the same mysterious entry each morning. Night completed, return successful. But now, sometimes, there were additions. A single, strange symbol drawn beneath the words. A new symbol appeared every few days, intricate and unlike any language we knew. We copied them into our own journals, trying to decipher a pattern, a message. It felt like we were on the verge of a breakthrough, communicating with beings from another existence. One of the engineers, a quiet man named Elias, became obsessed with the voices. He spent every night with his ear pressed to the floor, his eyes closed in concentration. He claimed he could almost understand them, that the words were just on the edge of making sense, like a half-remembered dream. It's not a language of the mouth, he'd say, his voice hushed with reverence. It's a language of thought, of feeling. We were skeptical, but we let him be. We were all a little mad. After all, sailing on a ship that drowned itself every night. We were no longer sailors on a voyage. We were participants in a nightly seance. The world above the waves started to feel thin and unreal. The sun, the clouds, the other ships we passed on the horizon, they were all part of a temporary illusion. Our true reality was down below, in the crushing dark, listening to the secrets of the abyss. Then came the night the ship didn't stop. It touched the seafloor with its usual softness. The voices rose to greet us, and the familiar comfort settled in. But this time something was different. A new feeling permeated the vessel. Expectation. The muffled conversations from below sounded clearer, closer. The laughter was louder. The stories more urgent. It felt as if they were right outside the hull, waiting for an invitation. A low hum started to vibrate through the deck. A steady, resonant frequency that made our teeth ache. The lanterns flickered, not randomly, but in time with the hum. 1, 2, 3. A steady pulse. Elias, who was already at his listening post on the floor, suddenly gasped. His eyes flew open, wide with a mixture of terror and wonder. "They're calling," he whispered, his voice trembling. "They're calling for one of us." The hum grew stronger, the rhythmic flickering of the lights faster. The pressure in the cabin intensified until it was hard to breathe, hard to think. It wasn't the calm pressure of the descent anymore. This was an active, searching force. It swept through the room, through each of us, as if it was looking for something. We felt assessed, scanned. It lingered on each crew member for a moment before moving on. A cold dread began to creep into our hearts, chilling the strange comfort we had grown to love. The abyss was no longer a passive neighbor. It was making a demand. The hum focused, the light from the lanterns coalescing into a single, bright beam that landed on Elias. He was bathed in an otherworldly glow, his face a mask of awe. The voices from below all stopped at once. A new voice spoke, this time not from below, but from everywhere. It was in our heads, a clear, powerful thought that was not our own. It spoke one word: "Welcome." Elias slowly got to his feet, as if pulled by an invisible string. He walked towards the main hatch, his movements fluid and unnatural. We were frozen, unable to move. Unable to shout, he unlatched the heavy door that led to the deck, to the crushing, absolute darkness of the deep ocean. He didn't hesitate. He swung it open, and the sea did not rush in. Standing in the open doorway, Elias was silhouetted against a soft, pearlescent light that emanated from the deep. Where there should have been a wall of black water, there was an opening, a path. The water had parted, creating a shimmering, dry corridor that led down, away from the ship, into the glowing heart of the abyss. The voices returned, but now they were clear, welcoming. They were coming from the end of that impossible path. We could see shapes moving in the light down there. Figures that were almost human, but elongated, graceful. They beckoned. Elias turned back to look at us one last time. There was no fear in his eyes, only a profound sense of peace. A look of homecoming. He smiled, a small, sad smile, and then he stepped through the doorway. He began to walk down the path of light, his form shrinking as he descended into the depths. The figures at the end of the corridor moved to greet him, surrounding him, embracing him. Then, as one, they turned and faded back into the light. The path collapsed. The ocean slammed back against the hatch with the force of a tidal wave, the door groaning under the sudden, immense pressure. The hum stopped. The lights returned to their normal, steady glow. The voices from below were silent. For the rest of the night, a profound quiet filled the ship, heavier and more terrifying than any sound. We were alone again. When the ship began its reluctant ascent with the coming of dawn, we rushed to the logbook. The familiar entry was there. Night completed. Return successful. But beneath it, in the same neat, unfamiliar hand, was a new sentence. One has returned home. We were fewer now, and we finally understood. The ship wasn't just a vessel for us. It was a vessel for them. An elevator between worlds. And we weren't just the crew. We were the offering. The second night, the sea welcomed us sooner. We hadn't even finished lowering the lanterns when the deck began its familiar, gentle tilt. It was a subtle shift, a quiet invitation. This time, No one panicked. There were no shouts, no scrambling for life. Vests, we simply held the railings, our knuckles white, but our bodies steady and quiet, as the dark water rose to meet us once again. The fear from the previous night was gone, replaced by a strange sense of anticipation, something that felt almost like recognition. The descent felt smoother, less like a catastrophe, and more like a planned maneuver. It was familiar. Outside the portholes, the dark water wasn't just empty. Shapes began to drift past, silhouetted against the faint glow of our lanterns. They weren't fish. They weren't seaweed or any kind of marine life we knew. They were structures, broken columns, long, graceful curves of stone, and arches whose sharp edges had been softened by what must have been eons of time. A city lay beneath us, vast and patient, stretching out far beyond the reach of our limited lights. It was a silent, sunken metropolis, waiting in the deep. Then, the voices returned. The same whispers we'd heard before, but clearer now, no longer a faint, maddening hum. They weren't just sounds. They were words. And they spoke our names. Not everyone's. Only some. My name wasn't called, but I saw the looks on the faces of those who were. A mix of shock and longing. It was as if they were being greeted by old friends. They'd long forgotten. When the hull finally touched down, the sound wasn't the violent crash of a shipwreck. It was a deep, resonant thud that echoed upward through the entire vessel. A sound of arrival. The ship settled gently onto a wide, flat surface of stone, worn impossibly smooth, as if by centuries of these very eruptions. The immense pressure that had been squeezing the hull eased, and the lanterns inside brightened just a little, their lights seeming warmer, more stable. Then, something impossible happened. Doors began to open. Not ours, not the doors on the ship. Down below, outside the vessel, faint lights started to appear. One by one, they twinkled into existence, lining what looked like invisible streets in the sunken city. And within that new light, shadows moved. They were slow, unhurried, and disturbingly familiar in their bipedal shape. The voices grew louder again. Warmer, no longer just whispers, but clear invitations. One of the crew, a rugged old sailor named Thomas, began to cry. Not tears of fear, but of profound relief. He leaned against the bulkhead, his shoulders shaking. "I remember this place," he said, his voice soft and full of wonder. "I've never been here before, but I remember it." His words hung in the still air of the cabin, and we all understood. This wasn't a memory from his life. It was something older, deeper. Just then, the ship's logbook, sitting open on the captain's desk, updated itself. The ghostly script appeared on the page, the ink seeming to bleed into existence from nowhere. It read, "Docking confirmed." As if on cue, a gangway began to extend from the ship's side, lowering itself into the dark, watery abyss. It should have been a catastrophic breach. It should have torn a hole in the hull and flooded us instantly. But it didn't. The water held back, respecting some unseen barrier. The air that drifted in from outside wasn't salty or wet. It was thick, heavy with the scent of ancient stone and dust, but perfectly breathable. The city waited. Out in the gloom, figures gathered at a distance. They were just shapes, watching us without faces, without any discernible movement. But we could feel their gaze. We understood then. This wasn't a wreck. Our ship wasn't sinking. It was a port of call, a destination for vessels like ours, ships that never truly belonged to the sunlit surface world. Without a word, some of the crew stepped forward, the ones whose names had been called. There was no hesitation. They walked towards the open gangway, as if they were simply going home after a long day's work. Their footsteps echoed with a strange warmth on the stone below. As they walked away from the ship and into the dim light of the city, the vessel itself seemed to change. It felt lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. Calmer, more complete. Somehow, those of us who stayed behind felt it too, a subtle pull. Not a forceful command, but a patient, quiet suggestion. A feeling that we could join them if we wanted to. But our names hadn't been called. Not yet. We watched as our shipmates disappeared into the ancient streets, their silhouettes merging with the other shadows. And then, just as mysteriously as it began, The journey reversed. As the first hints of dawn approached far above, the ship began to rise. The city faded below us, its lights dimming one by one. The voices quieted, not with sadness, but with a sense of satisfaction. We ascended through the dark water, back towards the world of light and air. We surfaced at sunrise, the ship floating peacefully on the open, glassy water. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink. Everything looked normal. Except the crew list was shorter. The faces we'd known were gone. No one asked where the others had gone. No one needed to, because deep down, in a place beyond logic, we all knew they hadn't been lost. They had been delivered. The ship's logbook held the final entry for the night, its spectral ink already fading as the sun grew stronger. It read, "Exchange accepted." We were fewer, but the ship felt whole, and as we stood on the deck, watching the sun climb higher, a quiet certainty settled over us all. Tonight, the ship would sink again, and we would be ready. We first noticed the shadow at noon. The sea was clear, the sun high, and the water calm enough to reflect the sky like glass. That's why the darkness beneath us stood out so sharply along, moving shape sliding just below the surface, matching our speed perfectly. At first, we assumed it was a trick of light, a cloud, a deep current, anything that made sense. But it stayed. Whenever we slowed, it slowed. When we changed course, it curved beneath us with smooth precision. It never overtook us, never fell behind. It was following. The first real flicker of unease began to spread through the crew. We tried to laugh it off, making jokes about giant squids or lost whales, but the laughter died quickly in our throats. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the unspoken fear that we were witnessing something that shouldn't exist. We tried to outpace it. The engines strained, their roar a desperate cry against the calm. The hull vibrated so hard my teeth rattled. And still, the shadow below did the same, gliding effortlessly, completely unaffected by our frantic struggle. It was like a predator, toying with its prey, patient and certain. It wasn't just keeping pace, it was mocking our effort, showing us just how powerless we truly were. The real terror set in when we checked the instruments. Sonar returned clean. Empty readings. The depth sounder showed nothing but the featureless ocean floor far below. According to every piece of technology we had, the sea beneath us was empty. But our eyes, our own senses, told us a different story. They screamed that something was there. Something massive and real. It was a terrifying contradiction. A rift between what our machines told us and what we could plainly see. It made you question your own sanity. The shape was enormous, far longer than our own ship, and wider, its outline blurred at the edges, as if the water itself struggled to define it, to contain its impossible form. Sometimes, if you've stared long enough, faint details would appear in the shifting darkness, to ghostly suggestions of masts, railings, even the dark squares of windows. A ship. But it was all wrong. It was upside down, a phantom reflection sailing in a world beneath ours. Or perhaps it was simply deeper, existing in a layer of the ocean we never knew was there. As night fell, the shadow didn't disappear into the darkness. Instead, it grew clearer. Faint, bioluminescent patterns began to trace its surface, glowing with a soft, eerie blue light. These patterns outlined a vessel from a forgotten era, something far older than our modern ship. We could see the ghostly shapes of barnacles clinging to its spectral sides. Tattered ropes trailed from its deck, not floating up, but hanging downward, disappearing into a darkness that seemed to have no bottom. It was a ghost ship, sailing in a realm where the crushing pressure should have turned it to dust. The crew gathered at the railing, all of us drawn by a morbid curiosity we couldn't resist. The usual nighttime chatter was gone, replaced by a profound, watchful silence. Then, one of the younger Decans, his voice barely a whisper, said the words, "We were all thinking. It's waiting." And as if in response to his words, that's when we felt it. The pull, it wasn't strong, not a sudden lurch. It was just a gentle, persistent suggestion downward, like the tide changing beneath our feet when we weren't expecting it. The ship groaned, the old wood and steel creaking as it adjusted its balance, responding to a force we hadn't commanded and couldn't fight. The compass began to spin erratically, its needle no longer pointing north, but trembling, drawn to the anomaly below. The shadow shifted, rising closer. Closer than it had ever been before. It was so close now that when we leaned over the railing, staring into the black water, our own reflections merged with its glowing shape. Surface and depth blurred into a single, unsettling image. My face, pale in the moonlight, was superimposed over the spectral deck of the ship below. It felt like looking into a coffin and seeing yourself lying inside. The captain, a man who had sailed these waters for 40 years and feared nothing, stumbled back from the railing. His face, he went to the logbook, his hands shaking as he wrote a single new line. Later, I saw what he wrote. Just 2 words, contact imminente. It was in that moment, with the gentle pull growing stronger and our reflections staring back at us from the abyss, that we finally understood. All our fear, all our frantic attempts to escape, had been based on a misunderstanding. The shadow wasn't a predator. It wasn't a monster hunting us through the depths. We weren't being followed. We were being guided, and we were about to find out where. The descent began without any warning. The sea didn't rush in. Our ship didn't sink. It was something else entirely. Imagine the surface of the ocean rising around us, folding upward like the closing lid of a giant box. The horizon, that familiar straight line, it just bent and then it vanished. We were wrapped in a muted blue glow, a profound silence that swallowed every sound. We were slipping beneath the surface of the world. As we went down the shadow below us, the one we'd been following, it started to brighten. Its outline sharpened as we closed the distance. Suddenly, we could see details. Broken nameplates, railings green with corrosion, torn sails that looked frozen in an eternal, silent drift. This was a ship that had gone down and never surfaced again, and somehow it knew the way. Our own vessel responded to it instinctively. The hull angled downward, just enough to follow its lead. No commands were given from the bridge. The wheel turned on its own, a smooth, confident motion. Even the engines quieted, as if they knew they were no longer needed. We were being guided. The water grew denser, heavier, pressing in on all sides but without crushing us. It felt like being held. The light from the surface faded, replaced by a deep, steady glow that radiated from the ship below. It was our beacon, illuminating a path for Usawide, descending corridor through the absolute darkness of the deep. And then we started passing things. Not wreckage, not what you'd expect. These were landmarks. Towering shapes of stone rose from the seabed, clearly carved and deliberate. They looked ancient. Roads, softened by centuries of water and sediment, stretched between them. We realized with a growing sense of awe and unease that this wasn't a graveyard. It was a city, a sunken city, lost to time. The ship below us slowed its descent, coming to a gentle stop, hovering above a vast open space that might have been a city square. Our ship followed, settling into position directly above it, like a mirror image finally meeting its source. The 2 vessels were perfectly aligned, separated by maybe 100 feet of water. And that was when the hatches opened. Not ours, not theirs, but something new. A passage formed between the 2 ships. It wasn't a physical structure, but a tunnel of light and shifting pressure that hummed with a soft, inviting energy. We tested the air at the edge of it. It was breathable, warm, and strangely familiar. Then we saw them, figures moving on the deck of the lower ship, a crew. Their forms were solid, their movements calm and practiced, as if they were just going about their daily routines. They looked up at us, not with a longing of lost souls, but with recognition, like they were expecting us. Some of our crew felt it immediately. A pull, right in the center of their chests. A profound sense of rightness, of coming on. One by one, they stepped forward, without hesitation, crossing the threshold into that glowing passage. They walked down the tunnel of light, descending toward the waiting ship below. No one tried to stop them. It felt correct. As each person left, we could feel the weight on our own ship easing. It grew lighter, more buoyant, and as our ship grew lighter, the one below grew brighter, its glow intensifying with every soul that joined it. On T-Bridge, the ship's logbook, which had been dormant, began to write on its own. A final, chilling line appeared on the page. Transfer in progress. When the last of them had crossed over, the passage sealed itself, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. The lower ship turned slowly, beginning a new, deeper journey into the heart of the city below, its light eventually fading into the abyssal architecture. And our ship began to rise. We ascended just as we had descended. Silently, effortlessly, we broke the surface at dawn, floating gently in calm, placid water. The sun climbed into the sky as if nothing had happened. All our instruments returned to normal. The sea showed no trace of the impossible depths we had just visited. No sign of a sunken city. We were fewer now, and we were lighter. We had delivered our cargo. It makes you think. Some ships sink and simply vanish into the abyss, but others follow. They follow the call, down into the dark, until one day, it's their turn to lead another vessel home. The knocking started on the third night. At first, it was easy to ignore just soft, irregular taps buried beneath the normal sounds of the ship. Wood expanding in the sea air, metal settling under strain. The gentle brush of water against the hull. The sea has 1,000 harmless voices. And for a while, this was just one of them. But this one was different. It came from below. Not from the sides where the waves lapped and crashed, but from deep under the keel, where nothing should be able to reach. It always followed the same pattern. 3 slow knocks. A pause. Tentuo mornak. Knock. Knock. Silence. Knock. Knock. We were in the middle of our evening meal when the pattern became obvious. One by one, we stopped speaking. We put down our forks. The sound wasn't random anymore. It carried upward through the deck. A gentle but deliberate rhythm, as if whatever was down there knew exactly where we were standing. The strangest part, when we moved, the knocking followed. If you walked from the port side to starboard, you could feel it sliding beneath your feet, keeping pace. It was a deeply unsettling feeling, like being watched by something you couldn't see. Our first mate, a man who'd spent 40 years at sea, went pale. He'd never heard anything like it. The captain, trying to keep everyone calm, ordered a full hull inspection at dawn. He dismissed it as a loose piece of cargo or maybe some strange current anomaly. 2 of our best divers went down into the cold morning water. They searched for over an hour, tracing every inch of the hull, from bow to stern. They found nothing. No debris tangled in the rudder. No damage to the keel. The sea beneath the ship was unnervingly clear and empty, fading quickly into a depth too dark to measure. The divers came back up, shivering more from unease than from the cold. That night, the atmosphere on the ship was thick with tension. Every creak of the timbers made us jump. And just as we feared, the knocking returned, but it was closer this time. It sounded heavier, more insistent. It wasn't a light tap anymore. It was the solid thud of knuckles against thick wood. You could feel it now. The deck vibrated faintly with each impact, a dull, resonant echo that traveled right through the soles of your boots and up into your bones. Lanterns hanging from the beams trembled. The cups on the table rattled softly against their saucers. It was during one of those deafening silences between the patterns that someone whispered it. A young Deccan, barely 8, he said, "It's asking." None of us had to ask what he meant. We all felt Italiano. The sound had an intelligence to it, a purpose. It wasn't just noise. It was communication. And then, the pattern changed. The familiar sequence of 3 knocks, a pause, and then 2, was gone. That night, it was 4 knocks, then a pause, and then 2 more. The night after that, it became A5. Each sequence was longer than the last, as if whatever waited below was learning our rhythms. Or maybe it was just growing impatient. We started imagining things, faces in the dark water, shadows moving just at the edge of our vision. Sleep became a luxury none of us could afford. We tried to sail faster, hoping to outrun it, but it made no difference. The knocking stayed with us, a constant, terrifying companion. On the 7th night, driven by a mixture of fear and desperation, one of the crewmen decided he'd had enough. He grabbed a heavy iron wrench from the engine room, marched to the center of the deck, right above where the sound was loudest, and waited. The knocking began, for heavy thuds from below. He waited for the sequence to finish. Then he raised the wrench high above his head and struck the deck with a single, sharp hit. A loud, metallic clang echoed across the silent water, and then nothing. The knocking from below stopped immediately. For a moment, a wave of pure relief washed over the entire crew. We looked at each other, smiles breaking out on our tired faces. Had it been that simple? Had we scared it off? The silence stretched on for a minute. Then, too, it was the most peaceful we'd have felt in days. But then it came. A reply from deep beneath the hull. A single, powerful knock. It perfectly matched the strength and tone of the wrench hitting the deck. It was a perfect echo, a mimic our relief, curdled back into absolute terror. The ship itself seemed to react. It let out a long, groaning creak that none of us had ever heard before. It wasn't the sound of strain from the waves or the normal settling of an old vessel. It felt like tension, like the entire ship was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. We retreated from the deck, huddling together in the captain's cabin, too scared to even speak. The captain, a man of rigid logic and procedure, looked completely lost. He opened the ship's logbook to record the night's events, but he stopped, his hand trembling. There, on the fresh, empty page for that day, was a single sentence written in a neat, unfamiliar script. A sentence none of us had written. It said, "Contact acknowledged." That was the moment we finally understood the horrifying, impossible truth of our situation. The knocking was not some random noise from the sea. It wasn't an animal or a piece of debris. It was coming from something intelligent. Something that had been listening and learning. Something that was now talking back. It was coming from directly beneath the ship, from something that believed the hull was a door, and we had just answered it. What do you think was knocking? A creature from the depths? Something supernatural? Let me know your theories in the comments below. The knocks grew more patient. They no longer startled us. Long, deliberate pauses stretched between each sequence of taps, as if whatever lay below was giving us time. Time to the city and time to answer. Time to finally understand. We stopped sleeping. It became impossible. Every time someone closed their eyes, the knocking shifted. It would slide directly beneath them, becoming gentle and precise, like a hand resting just under the deck. Some of the crew swore they could feel warmth rising through the wood, a strange, comforting heat. Others felt a bone-deep cold, but they were both wrong. It didn't feel like a temperature. It felt like recognition, like something down there knew you, personally. On the 4th night, the knocking changed again. It began to travel, not from side to side, but upward. We could trace its path. It started deep beneath the keel, moving through the lower decks, passing through empty storage holds and long-forgotten corridors. It was always rising, always tapping from just below the floorboards, no matter where we stood. We would run to another part of the ship, and moments later, there it would be, tapping right beneath our feet. The ship itself was changing. It felt thin. The wooden planks creaked softly under our weight, not breaking, but softening, yielding. The constant sound of water against the hull, a sound that had been our companion for months, began to fade. The sea felt farther away than it should have, as if we were no longer sailing on it, but floating just above. Then, the first impossible thing happened. One of the men, a seasoned sailor named Thomas, was cleaning fish. His hand slipped, and his knife clattered to the deck. But it didn't stop. It fell through the wood. It didn't break it. Didn't leave a hole or even a splinter. It just passed through, vanishing soundlessly into the space below. We all froze, staring at the spot where it disappeared. A moment later, a single knock came from directly below where the knife had fallen. Just one knock. It felt like acceptance, like a thank you. The captain, a man whose face was carved from years of staring into storms, gathered us at the center of the ship. His voice was strained, but he tried to keep us calm. As we huddled together, the knocking gathered there too, surrounding us in a slow, patient circle beneath our feet. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the pattern stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, pressing in on us from all sides, more terrifying than the knocking had ever been. That's when the hull spoke. Not in words, not in a voice you could hear with your ears. It was a sensation, a pressure that built behind our eyes, a shared understanding that settled over all of us at once, a thought that wasn't our own but belonged to all of us. It has always been here. It has always carried ships. Sometimes, it asks to be carried in return. The deck beneath our feet grew warm. The wood thinned until it felt less like timber and more like stretched skin. The knocking returned, but it was different now. It had become a single, steady, rhythm slow, careful, respectful. It was waiting. We realized then what was happening. The ship would not be broken into. It wouldn't be torn apart from below. It would be opened. From the inside out, we were the key. At dawn, the knocking ceased. The morning sun hit the deck, and the sea was impossibly calm. We checked the hull, inside and out. It was solid again. The wood was hard. There were no signs of damage, no missing crew, no explanation. But something had fundamentally changed. The ship rode lower in the water, heavier than it had any right to be. And when the sun was high enough to pierce the dark water, we saw it. Beneath our keel, a second shadow moved with us. It wasn't the shadow of our ship. It was the shadow of something walking just below us, keeping pace, step for a perfect step. We were no longer alone on the sea. We were carrying something, and we had no idea where it wanted to go. The anchor caught on something it shouldn't have. We were drifting over open sea, far from any known land, when the chain went taut with a sudden, heavy pull. The winch groaned, its gears screaming in protest. The entire ship lurched, as if held by an unseen hand. The strange part, no one had ordered the anchor dropped. Our captain, a man who knew these waters like the back of his hand, stood frozen at the helm, staring at the taut chain. Yet there it was, stretched straight down, disappearing into water far too deep for any seabed. According to our charts, nothing solid existed beneath us 4 miles. The ocean floor was supposed to be a barren, empty expanse, thousands of feet below. We were in the middle of nowhere. So, what was holding us? The crew gathered at the rail, whispering theories. A hidden reef, a massive, unknown sea creature. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. We waited. The chain did not sway. It did not drag, it just held firm, a steel umbilical cord connecting our world to another. The silence on deck was broken only by the gentle lapping of waves against the hull. Curiosity finally won out over caution. We had a small, remote-operated camera, our eye in the deep. We attached it to the anchor chain and began lowering it into the abyss. On the monitor in the bridge, we watched the feed as the camera sank through the darkening water. The sunlit blues faded to deep indigo, then to absolute black. The depth numbers on the screen climbed steadily. 500 feet, 1,000, 2,000. The pressure readings were off the charts, far exceeding the camera's safe operating limits. Still, the anchor held. We were all holding our breath, eyes glued to the screen. Then, the camera's powerful light revealed something impossible. Stone, not jagged rock, not a sprawling coral reef. We saw austere, wide, worn steps, descending into an even greater darkness, carved with a deliberate, almost elegant care. My heart hammered against my ribs. Stairs. Down here. The operator, a guy named Jake, slowly maneuvered the camera lower. More of it came into view arch doorways, towering columns covered in algae, the faint outlines of rooftops, softened by centuries of water. It was a city. An entire, sprawling city lay beneath us, silent and sleeping in the crushing depths. And our anchor, somehow, was lodged right at its heart, nestled in what looked like a central plaza. A collective gasp went through the bridge. We were looking at something that shouldn't exist, something that defied all logic and every map we had. The water around the ship grew strangely still. The gentle currents that had been nudging us along faded to nothing. The waves calmed, the surface becoming as smooth as glass. It felt as though the entire sea was holding its breath, watching us. As dusk fell, the atmosphere on board grew even heavier. No one spoke much. We just watched the horizon and the dark water below. That night, the lights appeared. At first, it was just one, a soft, ethereal glow flickering to life on the monitor. Then another, and another. Soon, dozens of soft glows were flickering along streets that should not exist, illuminating strange, ancient architecture. They weren't harsh or electric. They were gentle, like bioluminescence, but they moved with purpose. On DS screen, we could see shapes moving slowly through the illuminated streets. They were indistinct, just silhouettes against the light, but they were definitely moving, purposefully. Then, without any warning, the camera feed cut out. The screen went black, displaying a single, chilling message. Signal lost. A frantic energy filled the bridge. We tried to re-establish the connection, rebooted the system, but it was no use. Withy Eye was blind, but we didn't need the camera anymore. From T-Deck, we could feel it, a change in the pull. It was no longer just a dead weight holding us down. It felt different. It was almost inviting. The anchor chain itself began to vibrate faintly, humming with a low, deep resonance that traveled up through the ship's hull, through the steel deck, and into the soles of our feet. It was a sound you felt more than you heard, a thrum that vibrated in your bones. The ship settled in the water, finding a new, perfect equilibrium, as if it had finally come to rest exactly where it was meant to be. It was perfectly balanced above the unseen city. That's when the ship's first mate, Maria, noticed it. The ship's logbook, which sat open on the captain's chart table, had a new entry, an entry no one on board had written. The handwriting was elegant, an unfamiliar script of flowing lines and sharp angles. Underneath it, in stark, printed English, were two words: arrival confirmed. A cold dread washed over me, colder than the deepest ocean trench. We all stared at the logbook, then at each other, the horrifying realization dawning on us all at once. The anchor hadn't accidentally caught on a pile of ancient stone. It hadn't snagged on a ruin. It had been accepted. We weren't just anchored. We were docked. The next morning, the hum from the chain was louder, a constant, low thrum that seemed to call out from the depths. The water around us remained unnaturally calm. The air was heavy, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. We were prisoners of the deep, held captive by a force we couldn't comprehend. The captain tried to raise the anchor. He pushed the winch controls to their maximum setting. The motor screamed, the gears ground, and smoke began to pour from the housing. The chain didn't budge, not an inch. It was as if it had fused with whatever it was attached to. We were truly stuck. Panic started to set in. A few of the younger crew members were talking about cutting the chain. Just sever it and get out of here. But the captain, his face pale and grim, forbade it. We don't know what's down there, he said, his voice barely a whisper. We don't know what cutting that chain might do, what it might. Release, he was right. We were floating on top of a complete unknown. Acting rashly could make things infinitely worse. So we waited, trapped in a silent stalemate between our world and the one below. Days turned into a week. Our supplies were plentiful, but our nerves were shot. We took turns on watch, staring into the dark water, half expecting something to rise from the depths. The nights were the worst. The strange, soft lights would always return, dancing in the abyss below us. Sometimes we thought we could hear things, faint, melodic sounds, like distant singing, carried on the low hum of the anchor chain. It was beautiful and deeply unsettling. Was it real, or were our minds just playing tricks on us? One night, a crewmate named Sam swore he saw a face looking up at him from the water. A pale, luminous face with large, dark eyes. He was hysterical, and we had to sedate him. None of us wanted to believe him, but the fear was contagious. We started seeing things in the periphery, fleeting shapes in the dark water just beyond the ship's lights. The sense of being watched was constant, suffocating. The ship no longer felt like our home. It felt like a cage suspended over a world of silent, waiting observers. Then, the script in the logbook began to change. New entries appeared each morning. The strange, flowing characters seeming to describe U.S. Maria, who had a background in ancient languages, spent hours trying to decipher it. She found similarities to some lost Proto-Sumerian texts, but it was unlike anything she had ever seen. The entries seemed to be observations. The surface dwellers are agitated. They consume cooked flesh. Their vessel sings a song of iron and fire. It was a log of our existence, kept by an unseen zookeeper. The most disturbing entry appeared on the 10th day. The exchange is prepared. The gateway will open soon. An exchange a gateway? What did that mean? The humming from the anchor chain grew louder that day, the vibrations more intense. It felt like the whole ship was a tuning fork, resonating with a powerful, ancient energy. We were all on edge, knowing something was about to happen. As the sun set, the water around the ship began to glow. Not just below us, but all around us. A soft, blue-green light radiated upwards from the depths, turning the sea into a luminous, otherworldly landscape. The faint singing we'd been hearing grew louder, clearer. It was a chorus of voices, both male and female, singing a haunting, hypnotic melody. It wrapped around us, seeping into our minds. It didn't feel threatening. It felt welcoming. And then, right in the center of the glowing sea, a section of water directly above the sunken city began to swirl. It formed a whirlpool, but a slow, graceful one, its vortex glowing with a brilliant white light. The gateway. It was opening. We stood on the deck, mesmerized and terrified, unable to look away. The anchor chain, our tether to this mystery, began to retract. Slowly, smoothly, the winch turning on its own, pulling us down. The ship tilted forward, its bow dipping towards the swirling vortex. We weren't just anchored anymore. We were being reeled in. The last entry in the logbook, written in that same elegant script, was simple. Welcome home. As the water closed over the deck, I realized the truth. The city hadn't been lost. It had been waiting. And we were its newest residents. The sea wasn't our prison. It was our new world. The city below was awake, not in the sense of life that we recognize, but it was aware. As the night grew deeper and the last traces of sunlight vanished from the horizon, lights began to glimmer along its streets and plazas. These weren't random flickers like bioluminescent creatures. No, they moved in patterns, deliberate and structured, tracing pathways that spoke of intelligence and purpose. From our vantage point on the ship's deck, we watched as shadows stretched across ancient-looking buildings, folding themselves in strange, unnatural ways over arches and down grand staircases. The water itself, the very medium that separated our world from theirs, pulsed with a faint, almost imperceptible light. It carried soundless vibrations up the massive anchor chain, vibrations that resonated deep within the hull of our ship. We all gathered at the railing, drawn by an unspoken curiosity and a growing sense of awe. The chain hummed beneath our feet, a low, constant thrum that felt both mechanical and alive. And with each pulse that traveled up from the depths, a sense of memory washed over us. These were memories that were not our own. Visions of streets that had never existed in our world flickered at the edges of our consciousness. We saw figures walking along these spectral avenues, their forms hazy, but their movements clear. They would pause, sometimes, and look up, their gaze seemingly piercing through the miles of water, seeing us above just as clearly as we were trying to see them below. Then, the voices came. They weren't loud, not spoken in any language we could identify. It was more of a low resonance that bloomed directly in our minds, layered like overlapping tides of thought. The feeling was soft, melodic, and it carried a clear intention, a message that bypassed language entirely. Welcome, travelers, returners, keepers. The words, or the concepts they represented, echoed in the silent chambers of our minds. Some of the crew flinched, stepping backward instinctively, their hands flying to their heads as if to block out the intrusion. But others, like me, leaned closer to the edge, mesmerized, drawn in by the sheer impossibility of it all. None of us understood the language, yet comprehension was immediate, absolute. The city expected something from us. It was waiting for a response, and we, somehow, were meant to provide it. One of the elder sailors, a man who had spent his life on the sea, whispered what we were all beginning to feel. His voice was hoarse, filled with a mixture of terror and wonder. The anchor, it didn't just hold the ship in place, it anchored us. As if on cue, the wind died completely. The gentle lapping of waves against the hull ceased. The constant creak and groan of the ship's timbers faded into an unnerving silence. All that remained was the persistent hum from the anchor chain, and the subtle, rhythmic pulse of the water beneath us. Time itself seemed to stretch, elongated by a shared, breathless anticipation. Minutes felt like hours, yet nothing moved. The entire world seemed frozen in place, held captive within the radius of our anchor's mysterious hold. Then, something stirred in the streets below. From the central plaza, a column of water began to rise. It moved like a fountain in reverse, defying physics. Its surface smooth and unbroken, as it climbed toward us, it carried with it shapes that solidified into figures. They were tall and impossibly thin, their bodies covered with intricate patterns that mirrored the architecture of the city itself. They weren't swimming, they were being lifted, presented. They reached their long, slender arms upward toward the hull of our ship. The gesture wasn't threatening. It was expectant, inviting. At that moment, I glanced over at the ship's logbook, left open on a nearby table. A new line of text was appearing on the page, the ink flowing from the pen as if guided by an unseen hand. We watched, transfixed, as it wrote, "Contact made, exchange pending." In that instant, we all understood the anchor wasn't just a weight holding us fast to the seabed. It was a connection. A bridge between worlds, our deck above, the sunken city below. The impossible truth settled upon us. Those who chose could descend. They could step off the ship, into the water, and enter the city without drowning. Others would remain here, tethered by the chain, their fate balanced on the decision of a city older than memory itself. As the first light of dawn began to break on the horizon, the figures receded. They folded back into the streets and buildings from which they came, their forms dissolving until only faint glows remained on the water's surface. With a soft, metallic groan, the anchor chain slackened. The city went quiet once more, but the hum persisted, a quiet, constant reminder that it was still there, waiting. We surfaced fully into the morning light. The ocean was a perfect mirror, reflecting the brilliant sun and the clear blue sky, as if nothing had happened. The night's events felt like a shared, feverish dream, yet the anchor remained firmly engaged, a silent, unyielding tether to something far beyond our understanding. The crew members glanced at one another, a new and profound unease settling between us. We now carried the unspoken knowledge that not all of us would remain above the water forever. The choice had been presented. The bridge had been opened. The city below was sleeping. For now, and the chain continued its soft, rhythmic pulse, as if it were counting down the moments until our decision was made. The night had no end. We sailed under stars so bright it was almost day, yet the horizon remained shadowed, trapped in a perpetual twilight. Our instruments showed normal positions for the sun and the moon, the celestial bodies, were where they should be, but the sky itself refused to change. The eastern horizon would glimmer faintly at first, teasing us with the promise of sunrise. Then it would recoil, retreating back into a curtain of impenetrable darkness. It was like watching a promise being broken over and over again. We tried to steer into it. We thought, if the sky won't come to us, we'll go to the sky. But the ship would not comply. The wheel turned under our hands, but it felt heavy, sluggish, as if it were resisting some unseen force. The rudder shifted subtly on its own, refusing the direction we gave it. Every single attempt to sail toward that elusive dawn resulted in a slow, deliberate deflection back into the endless night. The deck creaked quietly under our feet, and in the strange silence, it was easy to imagine the wood itself whispering a warning. Do not cross. The crew grew tense. We were sailors, men and women of the sea, used to the rhythms of the sun and moon. This was something else entirely. No one spoke aloud about the fear, but you could feel it in the air, thick and heavy like a coastal fog. We were adrift in uncertainty, our familiar world turned upside down. The stars glimmered overhead, cold and distant, mirroring our circular, pointless course. But the horizon, our goal, our salvation, remained impossibly distant. Time stretched and warped. Minutes became hours, and hours blurred into what felt like days. The wind blew steadily, filling our sails, giving us the illusion of progress. But we were trapped, stuck in a narrow corridor of perpetual twilight, sailing an endless loop between a day that would unbegin and a night that would untruly fall. We were ghosts in our own lives, caught in the in-between. Then, one of the lookouts noticed the water. It wasn't behaving like any sea we knew. It moved unnaturally, as if it were following the contours of an invisible, submerged channel. The waves curled in impossible patterns, spiraling away from the east, as if repelled by an unseen magnet. The sea itself, the very ocean we called our home, seemed to reject the sunrise. Ripples formed strange, temporary barriers, and the currents twisted around us, creating invisible walls that guided the ship backward, gently but firmly, without any apparent force. It was then that a soft, ethereal glow appeared along the ship's railings. Our lanterns, which we hadn't lit, began to flicker on their own. They traced a path along the deck, a trail of light that led away from the horizon, back toward the heart of the ship. The light pulsed faint. Wasn't random. It was deliberate, patient, and insistent. This wasn't something natural, and it wasn't something man-made. It felt ancient. I walked to the edge of the deck, my heart pounding in my chest, and peered over the side into the dark water. Reflections shimmered on the surface. But it wasn't just our ship I saw. Mirrored in the waves were the faint, ghostly silhouettes of other vessels. Galleons from centuries past, clippers from a bygone era, even modern look in freighters, all trapped in the same watery corridor, all circling endlessly, never touching the light. They were the ghosts of sailors who tried and failed to cross the dawn. Returning to the captain's cabin, I opened the logbook. The last entry was not in the captain's hand, nor anyone else's from our crew. The ink was faded, yet the script was perfectly clear. It was a single, chilling line: sunrise forbidden. Persistence recorded. We realized it then. The night wasn't just darkness. It was a boundary, a law of this strange, forgotten corner of the world. And the ship, our ship, obeyed it. It was protecting us by keeping us here. We stopped fighting. We let the currents guide us. We sailed on. Not toward dawn, not toward darkness, but forward. In the endless twilight, forever aware that the sun could rise. Just not for us. We had become another ghost ship, another story whispered on the waves, a permanent resident of the sea that time forgot. And in the quiet hum of the ship, we found a strange sort of peace, a resignation to our new, eternal reality. The night had no end, but neither did our voyage. The horizon teased us. A faint glow appeared each night, creeping upward like water seeping through cracks in an ancient wall. It promised the warmth, the clarity, the ordinary world we once knew. Each time that sliver of light appeared, the crew would brace themselves. Hands gripped the wheel, Calloused fingers adjusted the sails, every muscle straining to pierce that veil of twilight. But the ship would not comply. It was a stubborn, living thing. No matter how hard we steered, no matter how perfectly the wind filled our sails, the vessel would simply glide sideways. It curled away from the sun's touch, as if recoiling from a flame, obeying some unseen, unyielding force. The water around us was just as strange. It shimmered in ways that defied physics. Ripples bent unnaturally, forming invisible tunnels and walls that we could feel more than see. A pressure against the hull. The waves seemed to close in behind us, erasing any trace of our passage, leaving us adrift in an eternal present. Even our own reflections were a lie. Looking over the side, we saw distorted versions of ourselves in the dark, duplicated, flickering between the deep night and the faint, teasing promise of day. It was as if the sea was showing us what we were becoming, fractured, stretched between two worlds, belonging to neither. One evening, as the false dawn painted the sky, a young crew member named Lyra whispered, her voice barely a breath of air, "It's alive. It knows we want to leave." Her words hung in the silent air, and a collective shudder went through us. Others knotted their faces grim, fear tightening their chests like a cold iron band. We all felt Italiano. The ship itself seemed to confirm her words. It creaked and groaned, but not from the strain of the sea. These were sounds of thought, of a deep, brooding sentience. The lanterns hanging from the masts swung in perfect, eerie unison, their light pulsing slowly, patiently. It felt like a warning, but we were desperate. We had to try again. The next time the glow appeared, we gave it everything. The sails caught a strong gust of wind. The wheel turned with the combined strength of 4 of our strongest sailors, and for one brief, fleeting moment, it felt like we were winning. A brilliant slice of true sunrise peeked over the horizon. The light, pure and golden, washed over the deck. A collective gasp escaped our lips. A shiver, not of fear, but of hope, ran through the wood beneath our feet. The air warmed instantly, and then birds appeared out of nowhere, hovering in place, as if suspended by unseen hands, their wings frozen mid-flap. It was a beautiful, impossible sight. And then, just as quickly, everything snapped back. The light didn't fade. It was violently retreated, sucked back into the horizon like a drop of ink in dark water. The shadows fell so sharply across the deck, they felt solid. The lanterns began to pulse faster now, their light no longer patient, but impatient, angry. The wind, which had been our ally moments before, shifted abruptly, turning against us. The waves, which had been calm, now rose and pushed the ship, gently but firmly, back into the twilight corridor we had been sailing in 4 nights. Or was it years? That's when we saw it. The logbook, lying open on the captain's table, had a new entry. A single line, written in a script that was not ours, had appeared on a fresh page. It read, "Attempt noted, persistence punished." The cold, hard truth washed over us, colder than any ocean spray. The night wasn't just a time of day. It was a boundary, a cage. The ship wasn't our vessel. It was our guardian, our jailer. And the crew, we were its passengers, its subjects, but only for as long as we obeyed. The revelation fractured us. Some still whispered of trying again, of finding a way to outsmart the ship. Their eyes held a defiant spark, a refusal to surrender. But others refused to even look at the horizon anymore. They would stare only at the glowing lanterns that marked the safe, circular path. Their spirits broken, no one slept. How could we? Time had lost all meaning. The stars rotated slowly overhead, mirroring the strange curvature of our twilight corridor, and the sea beneath reflected a sky that never, ever fully brightened. And yet, every night, the horizon still promises the sun. Every night, it pulls at that deep human desire to escape, to be free. And every night, the ship reminds us who is in charge. We, the crew, finally understood. Crossing the sunrise was impossible. Resistance was futile. And this endless, beautiful, terrifying night, This was our home, and it would be forever. The ship arrived at the first port empty. No containers, no crates, no barrels, just a clean deck, and the faint, rhythmic hum of the hull cutting through the water. We watched as merchants and grizzled dock workers pointed, laughed, and whispered amongst themselves. They were curious, but their amusement was quickly silenced when the captain gave his order. They were to wait. The ship would not be loaded. It had no interest in their goods, no concern for their cargo. You see, this vessel? It carried something else entirely. That first night, we noticed Italiano, a logbook, bound in worn leather, appeared on the captain's desk. It had been blank when we arrived. I'd swear to it. But now, its pages were filled with names. Names we had never seen before, written in an ink that shimmered faintly, almost alive in the flickering lantern light. The script wasn't scribbled or rushed. Each name was precise, deliberate, as if the pen itself knew each person intimately. We gathered the courage to question the captain. He just stared out at the dark water, his voice a low whisper. They. Choose us, he said, his words barely audible over the creaking of the ship. Or we choose them. The sea decides. None of us understood what he meant. We were just sailors, after all, but his tone sent a chill down our spines that had nothing to do with the night air. By morning, the strangeness grew. Some of the crew swore they saw shadows on the dock, lingering longer than they should, bending at unnatural angles, as if reaching for something. Then, we saw the new entries in the logbook, the names of merchants we'd spoken to just yesterday, people we had passed in the crowded streets. Faces we couldn't quite recall meeting, but the names were real, existing, documented. And now they were taken. At each port we visited thereafter, the same eerie pattern repeated itself. An empty arrival, a growing logbook, a wave of silent disappearances. The crew grew quiet, uneasy. The usual sea shanties and boisterous laughter were replaced by nervous glances and hushed conversations. We learned to dread the sight of that shimmering ink. Each new entry in the logbook corresponded to someone who would vanish within a week. Not violently, not suddenly. They would just disappear. Their homes would be empty, their jobs unfilled, their families left wondering. It was as if their entire lives were being carefully and methodically erased. We started to watch the sea. Really watch it. It remained impossibly calm, almost obedient, reflecting the stars and the sky like a flawless mirror. Yet we could feel its pull, a silent, unseen current that tugged at the ship, and at us. We began to suspect the sea knew. It knew whom the ship required. It was the one guiding our course. The ship did not care about traditional routes or the turning of the tides. It cared only about the names it carried, the collection it was amassing. Some nights, when the moon was hidden and the fog rolled in, whispers would float across the deck. They were soft, melodic, half-formed words that seemed to rise from the very planks beneath our feet. We realized it was the names themselves calling out. Were they asking for help? Warning us? Or were they pleading for release? We couldn't tell. The logbook never repeated a name. Each entry was unique, counted once, and then it was final. It was then we understood the horrifying truth. We were not simply sailing from one port to the next. We were not merchants or explorers. We were collectors, and the vast, unforgiving sea. It was the ledger keeper. Each new dawn brought us closer to another port, another set of names, another round of disappearances. The cargo hold remained empty of goods, but the ship itself grew heavier with every soul it claimed. We were trapped on this vessel, bound to its purpose. The worst part wasn't the fear of what was happening to the people on shore. It was the growing, knowing dread that one day we might find our own names written in that shimmering, final ink. The sea decides, the captain had said, and we were beginning to understand that its decisions were absolute. Our voyage had no destination, only a perpetual, silent harvest, and the horizon always promised more names. The names began to call directly. At first, they were just faint murmurs, so quiet you could only catch them if you were standing right by the railing, leaning over the dark water. But soon, those murmurs grew into whispers that threaded their way right into our thoughts. They felt familiar, like a memory you can't quite place, yet impossible. They didn't speak words, not in a way you could hear with your ears. Instead, they sent impressions, raw feelings that washed over you, wabs of fear, a deep aching longing, fragmented memories of a life left behind, a sense of unfinished business. Every single one of us on the crew felt it, though it hit each of us differently. For one, it was the cold dread of being lost at sea. For another, it was the bittersweet ache of a lover's goodbye. But no one, absolutely no one, could ignore it. Then, the shadows came. One by one, they started appearing on deck, usually just after the sun dipped below the horizon. They were a team, flickering forms that didn't belong to any living person. They had no weight, made no sound. They moved with a silent, eerie grace, drifting across the weathered planks, always toward one specific spot, the ship's logbook, resting on its pedestal in the captain's quarters. We'd watch, frozen in place, as the ink on the pages began to glow faintly, illuminating the names of those who had vanished. The shadows would linger over each glowing name, their forms wavering as if in reverence, before dissipating into the salty night air, leaving nothing behind but a chill. The captain, a man whose face was a roadmap of storms and secrets, laid down a strict rule. "Don't touch the logbook after midnight," he'd warned, his voice low and gravelly. Not for any reason, but on a ship like this, a ship soaked in mystery, curiosity is as inevitable as the tide. It's a dangerous thing, an itch you can't help but scratch. One night, a young crewman named Finn, braver or perhaps just more foolish than the rest of us, decided to test the captain's warning. The moon was a sliver in the sky, and the only sound was the gentle creaking of the ship's timbers. He crept into the captain's quarters, his bare feet making no sound on the floor. He reached out a trembling hand and lifted the heavy quill pen that rested beside the open logbook. The moment his fingers touched it, the sea around us changed. The calm, black water began to ripple violently, even though there was no wind. We rushed to the rails and looked down. Reflected in the churning surface weren't stars, but hundreds of distorted faces, their eyes wide, all of them staring up at the ship, up at us. Then came the hum, a low, resonant sound that rose from the very hull of the ship. It wasn't the sea, or the wind, or the thrum of the engine. It was the ship itself. It was alive. The hum pulsed with a clear, undeniable intention, and you could feel the vibration deep in your chest, a pressure like water slowly filling your lungs. Back in the cabin, Finn was the pen, now gripped in his hand, started moving on its own. He tried to fight it, his knuckles white, but it was no use. The quill dipped into the inkwell, and then, with a horrifying, elegant script, it traced a new name onto a blank page. Elias. Finn froze, his breath catching in his throat. His name was not Elias. There was no one named Elias on the crew roster. Who was it? The hum from the ship deepened, the pressure in our chests becoming almost unbearable. With a strangled gasp, Finn dropped the pen. It clattered onto the desk. For a split second, the name Elias glowed with a faint, ethereal light, then faded back into the blackness of the ink. By morning, the ship had moved on. It had silently sailed into the next port, as if guided by an unseen hand. And one of our own, a deckhand named Thomas, was gone. There was no scream, no sign of a struggle. His bunk was empty, his belongings untouched. Nothing remained of him but the faint, lingering echo of a name that wasn't his own. A name now whispered on the wind through the logbook's pages. The pattern was set. It repeated night after night with a terrifying, clockwork precision. A new name would appear in the book, written by an unseen force, and by sunrise, one person from the crew would be taken. Each disappearance was perfectly, unervingly silent. The rest of us, the ones who were left, we became shadows ourselves. We moved about the ship like ghosts, our eyes wide, our voices hushed. We watched the logbook, recording names we didn't understand, guarding the ship against the fatal curiosity that we knew could claim any one of us at any moment. By the 20th night, there was no more doubt, no more questions. We finally understood the horrifying truth of our vessel. This ship didn't carry cargo. It didn't ferry passengers from one port to another. It collected names, and the sea, the vast, unforgiving sea, served as its silent partner, ensuring nothing was ever truly forgotten. We weren't just a crew anymore. We were part of its ledger, our own names hanging in the balance, waiting to be written. And every time the sun set, the same cold thought gripped every one of us. The next name waiting to vanish. Kul Be Ours. Thanks for watching. Atmospheric. Slightly mysterious music begins and fades into the background. Have you ever felt like you're stuck in a loop, reliving the same day over and over? For the crew of one particular ship, that feeling became a terrifying reality. Welcome to a story that blurs the lines between navigation and nightmare. A journey into the heart of an impossible circle. This is the tale of the ship that sailed in circles without ever turning. Imagine this. You're on the open sea. The journey begins just like any other. The charts are meticulously plotted. The compass is checked and double-checked, and the sails are raised to catch a steady southeast wind. The ocean is calm, a vast, unbroken mirror reflecting a clear sky. The horizon stretches out, a perfect, clean line in every direction, promising adventure and new lands. Everything is exactly as it should be. The ship cuts through the water, leaving a clean wake behind it. The mood is optimistic. The first few hours are uneventful, filled with the routine tasks of a life at sea. But then, a subtle, creeping sense of unease begins to settle over the crew, like a fog rolling in from an unseen shore. It starts with a feeling of déjà vu, a strangely shaped cliff face on the distant coast. Haven't we seen that before? A small, rocky islet with a single, twisted tree. It seems impossibly familiar. At first, it's dismissed. The mind plays tricks at sea, and coastlines can look alike. But the feeling persists, growing stronger with each passing hour. The landmarks aren't just similar, they're identical. The very same ones they had logged and sketched hours ago are reappearing on the horizon in the exact same sequence. It's as if the world itself is on repeat. The ship, it seems, has returned to where it started. But how? No one remembers turning. The rudder has been held steady. The ship has been sailing a straight line. The collective denial is palpable. It must be a mistake. Panic begins to bubble just beneath the surface. The first mate grabs the compass, his hands trembling slightly. He taps the glass, expecting to find a malfunction, a reason for this madness. But the needle, after a lazy spin, it points directly ahead, confirming they are still on their intended course. Yet the evidence of their eyes cannot be denied. The shoreline repeats its haunting parade of familiar sights. Even the sky seems to be conspiring against them. Clouds that had drifted overhead hours ago are now moving backward, reforming into the same shapes in the same positions. Flocks of seabirds fly in patterns that perfectly mirror the paths they took earlier. It's a glitch in reality, a cosmic error that is both impossible and undeniably happening. The laws of physics, of time and space, have been suspended just for them. The crew is now gripped by a quiet, mounting dread. The captain orders course corrections. The rudder is thrown hard to port, then to starboard. The sails are reefed and adjusted, trying to force the vessel onto a new heading. They even resort to firing up the engines, a deafening roar that should have propelled them in any direction they chose. But nothing works. It's like trying to steer a ghost. The ship glides smoothly, effortlessly, ignoring every command. It continues along its invisible track, a path that only it seems to know. The crew are no longer sailors. They are passengers, prisoners on a ride they cannot stop. They are not steering the ship. The ship is steering them, trapped in a perfect, invisible loop. The feeling of control, the most fundamental illusion of seamanship, is stripped away, leaving only raw, cold fear. As night falls, it offers no comfort, no escape. In the vast darkness of the ocean, sailors have always looked to the stars for guidance. for a fixed point in a changing world. But tonight, the heavens are part of the deception. The constellations hang in the sky, brilliant and clear, but they are frozen. Orion the Hunter, the Big Dipper, the Southern Cross Day remain in the exact same positions they were in hours ago. The moon, a low, silver crescent, refuses to climb higher or sink toward the horizon. It hangs there, static and watchful, a silent observer to their cyclical torment. Time itself feels fractured, broken. It seems to be flowing forward as the ship continues to sail, but also backward as the world around them resets. They are caught in a temporal whirlpool, spinning endlessly between one moment and the next. And then the whispers begin. At first, they are almost imperceptible, easy to mistake for the sigh of the wind across the rigging or the creak of the ship's timbers. But they grow clearer, more distinct. Soft voices, carried on the breeze, whispering from every direction at once. This way. Again. Follow. The words aren't heard with the ears, but with the mind. They echo inside their skulls, a shared hallucination or a message from an unseen source. No one speaks of it. No one has to. A glance at a shipmate's wide, terrified eyes is enough to confirm that they all hear it. The voices are a constant, maddening chorus, urging them, reminding them of their fate, to follow again. The sea, which had been a calm mirror, now reflects the moon with an unnatural perfection. But it's not just a single reflection. As they stare into the dark water, they see repeated patterns, ripples, and glints of light that dance and swirl in a way that defies nature. It's like looking into a kaleidoscope, where reality is fractured and reassembled into a beautiful, terrifying symmetry. It's in that moment of shared horror that the final, crushing truth dawns on them. The ship isn't lost. It was never lost. It knows exactly where it is, and it knows exactly where it's going. They aren't on a journey to a new destination. They are the destination. They have sailed into a trap, a circle drawn upon the very fabric of the ocean, set long before they ever arrived. And the more they struggle, the more they fight against the current, the tighter and more precise the loop becomes. Their resistance only feeds the phenomenon. The captain, a man of logic and reason, is reduced to a single, stark entry in the ship's logbook. The page is filled with frantic, crossed-out calculations and desperate notes. But the final entry for the day is just 5 words, written in a steady, re-signed end course maintained, repetition observed. It is an admission of complete and utter defeat. There is nothing more to be said. They are no longer in control. They are simply observers of their own unending journey. As the first light of dawn breaks, painting the sky in shades of gray and pale pink, the silhouette of an island appears on the horizon. The crew stands frozen on the deck, a collective shiver running through them that has nothing to do with the morning chill. It's the same island, the same strangely shaped cliff face, the same rocky shore. They had passed it yesterday, but it is utterly unchanged. Not a single tree has grown. Not a grain of sand has shifted. Even the sound of the waves breaking on its shore is identical, a recorded echo of a moment that is now repeating for eternity. The horizon offers no escape, no variation, only the promise of the same sights, the same sounds, the same despair. The ship sails onward, silent and resolute, its course fixed. Its loops are imperceptible to an outside observer, yet for the crew trapped within, they are infinite. The journey has just begun, and it will never, ever end. What force has trapped this ship? Is it a place, a creature, or the ship itself? The mystery of the ship that sails in circles is far from over. The loop tightened. By the second night, the crew noticed patterns in the repetition. Birds flew the same arcs across the sky, their wings beating in a familiar, haunting rhythm. Waves rippled in the same way, cresting and falling with a precision that defied nature. Even the stars in the night sky shimmered with the same hypnotic pulse. The wind, which should have been a herald of change, carried only familiar scents, the sharp temps of salt, the damp smell of wet wood, and a faint, ghostly hint of smoke from a fire that was never lit. Each repetition was nearly identical, a chilling echo of the last, down to the smallest, most insignificant detail. It felt as if the sea itself had recorded us, capturing our journey on some cosmic tape, and was now replaying it for an unseen audience. Our journey had become a performance, and we were the unwilling actors, trapped in a single, endlessly repeating scene. Attempts to escape this bizarre theater failed, each one more spectacularly than the last. Every course correction we desperately plotted was subtly, almost imperceptibly, reversed. The helmsman would swear he was holding the rudder steady, that he felt the ship responding, but a quick glance at the compass or the stars told a different story. We would find ourselves returning to the original path, as if drawn by an invisible magnetic force. They filled and emptied with a precise, calculated timing, catching gusts of wind that shouldn't have been there, guiding our vessel back into the invisible, circular track. No command we issued, no matter how forceful or desperate, could break the cycle. The ship, our home and our prison, no longer obeyed us. It obeyed something else, something patient, deliberate, eternal. Then, the shadows on the deck began to behave strangely. Under the light of the moon and our swaying lanterns, they took on a life of their own. They no longer simply mirrored our forms. Instead, they elongated unnaturally along the wooden planks, bending around corners where no object should cast such a shape. Sometimes, they would stretch and creep toward crew members who were standing far from any light source, their dark tendrils reaching out as if to touch, to claim. The lanterns themselves flickered in sync with these shadowy distortions pulsing, slowly their light waxing and waning, as if the ship itself was breathing, as if it was aware of the creeping dread that had taken root in our hearts. A deep, unsettling awareness settled upon us. The ship was part of this. It was an active participant in our torment. A whisper, like the rustle of dry leaves, traveled across the deck. It was soft, yet every single one of us heard it, a collective sound that seemed to emanate from the very air around us. You have been noted. You belong to the path. The words were not spoken in any language we knew, yet the meaning was perfectly, terrifyingly clear. A profound silence fell over the crew. No one said a word. Some men clenched their fists, their knuckles white with a mixture of fear and helpless rage. Others simply stared blankly into the repeating horizon, their faces pale and drawn under the eerie, pulsing light of the lanterns. We were no longer sailors on a voyage. We were specimens in a jar, observed by an unseen force that had laid claim to our souls. Sleep became impossible. The very concept of rest felt like a distant, forgotten luxury. Time itself began to warp and stretch. Minutes melted into hours, hours into an indistinguishable eternity. As the same islands, the same horizon, and the same rippling waves repeated themselves over and over and over, the sun would rise, painting the sky in the exact same shades of orange and pink. It would set, casting the exact same long, dancing shadows. Our memories of previous loops began to blur, one into the next, creating a disorienting collage of identical moments. Had we been here for days, or for years? Was the man standing next to me the same one from the previous loop, or a phantom conjured by the sea? The repetition was a relentless hammer, chipping away at our sanity, grinding our sense of self into dust. By the third night, the repetition felt alive. It was no longer a passive playback, but an active, intelligent force. The ship itself seemed to move with a new, eerie grace. It groaned subtly, not with the strain of wood and rope, but with the sound of a living thing adjusting its own trajectory. It was guiding us with a hintla, almost tender hand, through patterns in the water that were invisible to our eyes. We watched in a daze as waves curved gently around the hull, forming shimmering corridors of water that led us deeper into the cycle. Currents, once our adversaries, now pulled with just enough force to reinforce the loop, nudging us back on track whenever the wind might have offered a brief, fleeting chance of deviation. The horizon, that eternal symbol of hope and new beginnings, shimmered faintly, always promising a break, a way out, but delivering none. It was a mirage, a cruel joke played on a loop. One morning, the captain, his face a mask of gaunt exhaustion, opened the ship's logbook. He had stopped trying to chart our non-existent progress days ago, but on the fresh, empty page, a single new line had appeared. It was written in a perfect, elegant script that belonged to no one on board. The ink was still wet. It read, "Resistance observed. Adjustment complete." A collective silent gasp went through those of us who crowded around to see it. That was when we finally, truly understood. This was not a trap, not a curse in the traditional sense. We were not being punished. This was a rhythm. And we were merely passengers, incidental to its grand, inscrutable design. Our struggles, our desperate attempts to break free, were seen as nothing more than minor errors in the system, glitches to be put. The realization brought a new, colder kind of fear. Some men, driven mad by the endless cycle, made a final, desperate bid for freedom. They tried to step overboard, but they didn't fall into the water. They didn't drown. They didn't drift away to be lost at sea. As their feet left the deck, they simply vanished. One moment, they were there, a silhouette against the repeating dawn, and the next, they were gone, folded back into the loop, reabsorbed by the pattern. Their voices sometimes echoed faintly in the night wind. Whispers carried on the same familiar breeze, indistinguishable from the other ghostly sounds that haunted our waking nightmares. Their disappearance wasn't an escape. It was an assimilation. They hadn't left the path. They had become part of it, and so the ship sailed on, circling endlessly, without ever turning, without ever reaching an exit. Every repetition, every identical sunrise and sunset, made the crew smaller in spirit, yet strangely more attuned to the rhythm. The fight went out of us, replaced by a hollow, listless acceptance. We learned the patterns. We knew which bird would cry out, and when. We knew the precise moment a particular wave would break against the hull. Escape was no longer an option, no longer even a thought. Only endurance remained. There was only the sea, the sky, the ship, and the endless, perfect, soul-crushing circle. We were no longer men. We were part of the mechanism, cogs in a machine whose purpose we would never know, sailing forever on a journey with no destination. The path had us, and it would never let go. The ship did not age. Days passed, if they were days at all, but the wood never cracked. The sails never frayed, and the metal never rusted. It was as if time itself had forgotten us, leaving the vessel suspended in a perfect, unchanging moment. Yet we, the crew, were not so fortunate. Only the crew changed. Faces grew distant, their features blurring like watercolors left out in the rain. Memories thinned like mist under a morning light that never quite broke the horizon. Names, once so familiar, became difficult to recall, even our own. We were shadows of who we once were, tied to a ship that refused to let us go. The sea around us was an endless canvas of impossibilities, yet it was never the same. Some nights, it reflected stars that did not belong to any sky we had ever known. These constellations were alien, forming shapes and patterns that whispered of other galaxies, other realities we could never reach. Other nights, the ocean turned perfectly black, a void that swallowed all light, all sound, all hope. In those moments, we felt as though we were suspended in nothingness, the ship a solitary island in an infinite abyss. Time, that constant we had always relied on, became a fluid, unpredictable force. It stretched, folded, and overlapped. We could sail for what felt like years, watching our beards grow long and our skin weather, only to look up and find the moon in the exact same position it had been in moments before. The repetition was maddening, a cruel joke played by a universe that had lost its rules. But then, sometimes, glimmers of hope would appear, mirages in our vast, watery desert. A coastline would emerge from the fog, shimmering and inviting. We could see warm lights twinkling in the distance, the silhouettes of quiet docks, and the promise of rest. A collective sigh would ripple through the crew. We would feel it in our bones, a deep, primal yearning for solid ground. This could be it. This could finally be the end of our ceaseless journey. The ship itself seemed to agree, slowing its pace, as the water calmed around it. Hope, a feeling we had long thought dead, would return, blossoming in our chests. We would lean over the rails, our eyes fixed on the shore, imagining the feel of earth beneath our feet, the taste of fresh water, the sound of laughter that wasn't our own hollow echoes. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, the shoreline would drift away. It wasn't because we turned the ship or the wind changed direction. It was the land itself that receded, dissolving back into the mist as if it had never been there at all. The promise of sanctuary was always just that, a promise, never a reality. The hope would curdle into despair, leaving us emptier than before. Each time this happened, a piece of us broke. The cycle of hope and disillusionment was a more potent poison than any venom, slowly eroding our will to even look towards the horizon. We were Sisyphus, but our boulder was an entire world that we could never reach. As our memories and hopes faded, the whispers grew clearer. They were no longer just the creaking of the hull or the sighing of the wind through the rigging. They started to come from within us, rising from the quietest parts of our minds. They were as soft, insidious reminders, weaving themselves into the fabric of our thoughts. "There is no harbor," one would murmur as we stared into the empty expanse. "There is no arrival," another would echo when we felt a pang of homesickness. The most chilling whisper of all was the one that explained our fate. "Only those who forget can stay." It was a bargain we never agreed to, a price we were paying without our consent. To remain on the ship was to lose everything that made us who we were. Then, the crew members began to vanish. It wasn't in the dramatic way you might imagine. No one fell overboard locked in a struggle. No one succumbed to a sudden, violent sickness. They simply faded. One moment, a man would be standing beside you, mending a net or coiling a rope, his presence as solid and real as the deck beneath your feet. The next, he was just not there. There was no gap, no sudden sense of absence. Reality quietly adjusted itself, as if the ship had never carried him in the first place. The space he occupied was filled. The conversations he was part of never happened. And with him, all our memories of him vanished too. We couldn't recall his name, his face, or the sound of his voice. It was the ultimate erasure. Eventually, the chilling truth settled upon us. We understood. This ship was not a vessel traveling the sea from one port to another. The ship was the journey itself. It existed as a physical manifestation of wandering, a sanctuary from motion without destination. It was created to preserve the act of searching forever. Those of us who had boarded, each with our own reasons for seeking passage, had become part of its purpose. We were the fuel for its endless voyage. Our memories and identities, the price of admission. We were destined to sail until we no longer remembered why we had ever wanted to leave in the first place, until the concept of a destination became as foreign as the strange stars above. On one particularly quiet night, the stars themselves seemed to dim, their light growing faint and distant. The sea stilled completely, its surface becoming a perfect, unbroken mirror of the darkening sky. The ship slowed, its usual forward momentum ceasing. It wasn't preparing to dock. It was listening. In the profound silence, the whispers inside us softened, losing their menacing edge and becoming almost kind. Kind. They no longer felt like a curse, but like a gentle lullaby. In that moment, a strange and profound feeling washed over the remaining crew. Some of us felt a deep, resonant peace, a letting go of all the struggle and yearning. Others felt a primal fear, the terror of finality, of becoming nothing. But all of us, whether in peace or in fear, felt acceptance settling in like an anchor that we knew would never touch the bottom. We stopped watching the horizon after that night. There was nothing left to wait for. The illusion of a destination had been shattered, and with it, our last vestiges of resistance. We were no longer sailors on a ship. We were the ship. We were the endless motion, the perpetual journey. The ship sailed on, not forward, not backward, but endlessly, through waters without shore, carrying what remained of us. We existed in a state beyond time, beyond memory, simply moving. We were carried on, and on, and on, until even that, even the last fragments of our consciousness, was no longer needed, and the ship, unburdened and eternal, continued its silent, solitary voyage through the void. The ship appeared on no chart. No harbor had a record of its arrival, and no sailor had ever laid eyes on it before. Yet, when it sailed past other vessels, it was unmistakable. A dark hull, towering masts, and sails that shimmered faintly with colors I couldn't quite name. It carried no flags, no nameplate, and absolutely no markings of ownership. The crew knew they were aboard by chance or, perhaps, by fate. No one remembered boarding. Some simply woke up on deck mid-voyage, drenched in seawater, even though the sky had been calm and the sea perfectly still. Others seemed to materialize through a thick fog or mist, their memories of departing from the shore hazy and frustratingly incomplete. The very first night, the ship began to act strangely. It refused all commands. The wheel would turn with no force from human hands, as if guided by an unseen helmsman. The sails billowed, filled with a wind that blew in perfect alignment with an invisible course, one that defied all logic and navigation. The compass spun wildly for a moment, then stilled, its needle pointing to nothing. The horizon stretched out before us, endlessly, in every single direction. There was no sunrise, no sunset, no landmarks to give us our bearings. We were adrift in an ocean of sameness. Then, the whispers began. They were soft, almost polite at first, but grew more urgent. These were voices that seemed to know each and every name on deck, past, present, future, and lost. They called to us from the shadows, from the rigging, from the very planks beneath our feet. The crew looked at one another, a silent question passing between us. Some had no recollection of their own past, their lives before the ship, a complete blank. Others remembered everything perfectly, and they feared what had been forgotten by the rest. By the second night, a chilling realization dawned upon us. The ship never intended to dock. Ports would appear in the distance mall, inviting, alive with the promise of land and safety, but they would fade away before we could ever get close. Islands materialized on the horizon, lush and green, only to dissolve like mist as we approached. Other ships passed us by, sometimes so close we could see the faces of their crew, but they never saw us. It was as if we were ghosts on the water, traveling in a space that overlapped with the real world, yet did not truly belong to it. The deck under our feet shifted subtly, accommodating currents we couldn't feel, tides that made no sense, and winds that obeyed no sky. The ship itself seemed to pulse with a life of its own, a slow, steady rhythm that made our hearts beat in time with it. It was both comforting and deeply unsettling. We were part of something ancient and powerful, something we couldn't begin to comprehend. One morning, we found an entry in the ship's logbook, one that none of us had written. The handwriting was elegant, precise, and utterly alien. It read, "Journey eternal. No arrival. No return. No end." The words sent a shiver down our spines. Days, nights, and seasons became meaningless. The sun and moon were unreliable companions, appearing and disappearing at random. We learned to tell time not by the sky, but by the subtle changes in the ship's rhythm, the pitch of the whispers that echoed in our minds. The crew adapted slowly, each in our own way. Some stopped speaking altogether, retreating into the silence of their own thoughts, their eyes holding the vast emptiness of the sea. Others drifted into the endless ocean in spirit, their bodies remaining on deck, but their minds lost to the eternal voyage. The ship didn't seem to notice our despair. Perhaps it simply didn't care. It sailed on, relentless and unwavering. It was then that we finally understood the truth. There was no harbor waiting for us. There was no final destination. There would be no pause, no conclusion to our journey. There was only the voyage itself. The ship sailed forever, and we, those who were aboard, would sail with it. Endlessly, we were bound to a vessel without a beginning and without an end, drifting on waters that spanned beyond all maps, beyond time, and even beyond memory. Our stories were swallowed by the sea, our names carried only by the whispers on the wind. We became the crew of the last ship, the one that never docked anywhere, sailing into an eternity we never chose. We tried to fight it at first. We attempted to steer the ship, to lower the sails, to drop anchor in the phantom bays that tantalized us. But our efforts were futile. The ship was the master, and we were merely its passengers, or perhaps its prisoners. The ropes would slip through our hands, the anchor chain would refuse to budge, and the wheel would spin freely, mocking our attempts to control our own destiny. The whispers grew louder during these moments of rebellion, chiding us, reminding us of our place. You are here for the journey. They would hum, not the destination. Food and water were never a concern. Crates of supplies would simply appear in the hold, replenished by an unseen force. The water in the barrels was always fresh, the bread never stale, the salted meat never spoiled. It was a strange kind of provision, one that sustained our bodies but did nothing to soothe our souls. It was another sign that we were meant to endure, to continue this voyage indefinitely. We were cared for in a delicate, impersonal way, like livestock being kept for a purpose we couldn't fathom. Friendships formed and frayed. We shared stories of the lives we vaguely remembered, painting pictures of families, homes, and loves that felt more like dreams than memories. We found solace in each other's company, a small island of humanity in a sea of supernatural indifference. But the endlessness of the journey wore on us. Hope, a currency we once had in abundance, dwindled with each passing non-day. Some crew members would stand at the rail for hours, staring out at the unchanging horizon, their faces becoming as blank and featureless as the sea itself. We started to see things, or maybe the ship showed them to us. Glimpses of our pasts played out on the surface of the water. A child's laughter, a lover's embrace, a final goodbye on a distant shore. These visions were cruel tortures, reminders of all that we had lost. They were followed by visions of the future, futures we would never have. Weddings, growing old, grandchildren playing at our feet. The ship showed us the lives we were denied, rubbing salt in the wound of our eternal captivity. The ship itself became our world. We knew every creak of its timbers, every strain of its rigging. We learned the subtle language of its movements. A slight list to port might mean we were passing through a memory of a great storm. A vibration deep in the hull could signal the proximity of another lost soul, another ship trapped in this in-between space. We were no longer sailors on a ship. We were a part of the ship, our blood and bones intertwined with its wood and iron. The whispers eventually stopped being just voices. They took on form, coalescing into shadowy figures that would walk the decks at twilight. They were the echoes of previous crews, men and women who had sailed this very ship centuries or millennia ago. They didn't speak to us directly, but we could feel their sorrow, their resignation, their endless patience. They were a vision of our own future, a silent promise of what we would become. We were just the latest in a long line of the lost. And so, we sail on. The concept of escape has faded from our minds, replaced by a dull, aching acceptance. We are the ghosts of the sea, the crew of the phantom vessel. We are a story told in whispers by sailors who glimpse our impossible sails on the horizon before we fade back into the mist. We have no destination. We have no hope of return. We are bound to this eternal journey, our only purpose to sail, and sail, and sail, until the stars themselves burn out and the oceans run dry. We are the crew of the last ship, the ship that never docks, and our voyage has no end. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy tales of the mysterious and the unknown, be sure to follow 4 more stories from the edge of the map. And, as our story fades into the night, I hope the shadows felt gentle and the silence kind. If your eyes are feeling heavy, let them close. Let the echoes of this tale drift quietly away with your thoughts. If you've found comfort here tonight, you're always welcome to return. New stories will be waiting for you just beyond the dark. Feel free to like the video or subscribe if this space brings you peace, but only when it feels right for you. Until next time, rest well, sleep deeply. And remember, even in the quiet darkness, you are never alone.